My name is Abigail, and by the time you reach my age, you believe there's very little left in the world that can truly surprise you. You think you've seen cruelty in all its forms, quiet betrayals, loud humiliations, the slow erosion of trust over years. You think you understand people. You think you know how far they can go. I was wrong. The evening it all began was supposed to be perfect. We were gathered in a private dining room overlooking the river, the kind of place where the lighting is soft enough to flatter everyone and the staff move like shadows. My grandson, Daniel, had just graduated, top of his class, scholarship secured, future practically glowing in front of him like a golden road. He looked so much like his grandfather that night it nearly broke my heart. "Grandma, did you hear the applause?" he asked me, leaning closer, his voice full of excitement. I thought the dean was going to keep talking forever. I smiled and squeezed his hand. "They were proud of you. We all are." And I meant it. Every word. That boy had worked harder than anyone I knew. Late nights, early mornings, summers spent doing jobs far beneath his potential just to stay independent. I was so proud I could barely breathe. That's when the voice cut through everything. "Oh, please. Can we not turn this into some kind of fairy tale?" It came sharp and cold like glass snapping. I didn't need to look up to know who it was. "Clara. My daughter-in-law." She didn't raise her voice, but she didn't need to. There was something about the way she spoke, controlled, deliberate, that made people listen whether they wanted to or not. The room shifted. Conversations at nearby tables slowed. People always sense when something unpleasant is about to happen. My son, Michael, stiffened beside her. "Clara," he warned quietly. But she was already standing. She smoothed her dress, took her time, and then turned toward me with that smile, the one that never reached her eyes. "You all want to celebrate," she said, gesturing lightly toward Daniel.
Fine.
"But let's not pretend this entire situation isn't embarrassing." Silence spread like a stain. Daniel blinked, confused. "Mom, what are you?" "I'm talking about her," Clara interrupted, pointing directly at me. Not subtly, not politely, directly. "At my age, you learn to keep your face still, no matter what." Inside, something tightened. Outside, I smiled. "She's been playing the role of the sweet grandmother for years," Clara continued, her voice gaining strength as she went on. "But honestly, I'm tired of pretending." Michael looked like he wanted to disappear. "That's enough." "No, it's not enough," she snapped, turning toward him before facing me again. "Do you have any idea how exhausting it is to constantly cover for someone who doesn't belong in the world you're trying to build?" There it was. Not anger. Contempt. Pure and simple. I glanced down at myself. Dark blue dress, simple jewelry. Nothing extravagant, but certainly appropriate. But I knew this wasn't about clothing. It never was. "You embarrass me," Clara said louder now. "Every time we're in public, I have to worry about what you'll say, how you'll act, how people will judge us because of you." A few heads turned fully now. No more pretending not to listen. Daniel's voice came out strained. "Mom, stop." But Clara stepped closer to me. "You don't understand how people like us live," she continued. "You don't understand how important image is. You don't understand anything." The words landed, one after another, like careful strikes. I felt them. Of course I did. But I didn't react, because I had been waiting for this moment. For months. "You disgust me," she added quietly, leaning just enough so only I could clearly hear it. "I look at you and wonder how we're even related." That was the moment something inside me settled. Not broke. Settled. Like a final piece sliding into place. Instead of anger, I felt calm. A strange, steady calm. I smiled. Not a big smile. Just enough. And that confused her. I could see it in her eyes. What's so funny? She demanded. I didn't answer. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. My hands were steady, far steadier than she expected. I caught the waiter's attention. He had served our family for years. He knew me well enough to recognize that something unusual was happening. I gave him a small nod. That was all. What are you doing? Clara asked, her voice tightening. Still, I said nothing. Across the room, the soft music faded. At first, people thought it was part of the evening, some transition, perhaps a speech or announcement. Then the large screen on the wall flickered. And changed. Clara turned toward it. I watched her face. I watched the exact moment her confidence cracked. No, she whispered, but it was already too late. The image sharpened. There she was, sitting in an office. Calm, composed. Recorded just months earlier. A man's voice spoke from the speakers, clear and professional. So, you're certain you want to proceed with this decision? Yes, Clara replied on the screen. Completely certain. The room went silent. Not polite silence. The kind of silence that presses against your ears. What is this? Michael whispered. No one answered. On the screen, Clara continued. I don't want any future contact, she said. No legal ties. Nothing. The man asked, You understand this means a permanent separation? Yes. Her voice was cold, flat, final. I'm starting over, she said. I don't need complications from my past. Beside me, the real Clara swayed slightly. Her hand gripped the edge of the table. You need to turn that off, she said, but her voice had lost its strength. No one moved. On the screen, the man hesitated before asking one more question. And if she tries to find you in the future? There was a pause. A brief one. Then Clara answered. Tell her I'm gone. The words echoed. Tell her I'm dead. A gasp rippled through the room. And right next to me, Clara collapsed. I sat there, completely still, as chaos quietly began to build around us. People whispering, chairs shifting, Daniel frozen in place. Michael staring at the screen like he didn't understand the language anymore. But I understood everything, because I had been preparing for this moment for a long time, long enough to know that this was only the beginning. The moment Clara collapsed, the room didn't explode into chaos the way people imagine scenes like that. It didn't turn loud or frantic, not at first. Instead, everything slowed down, like the entire world had taken a breath and forgotten how to release it. A chair scraped somewhere to my left. Someone whispered a name I didn't catch, and the waiter who had helped me stepped forward instinctively, unsure whether to assist her or pretend none of this was happening. I remained seated, hands folded neatly in front of me, watching as my son knelt beside his wife, calling her name in a voice that sounded like it belonged to a stranger. Clara, Clara, wake up. Daniel stood frozen, his eyes moving between the screen and his mother, trying to piece together two versions of reality that refused to fit. I could see the exact moment confusion turned into something heavier, something sharper. He looked at me then, not accusing, not yet, but searching. I held his gaze calmly, because if there was one thing I had learned in life, it was this. When the truth finally surfaces, the worst thing you can do is rush to explain it. People need to feel it first. The staff eventually helped Clara into a chair. Someone brought water. Someone else turned off the screen, though it hardly mattered anymore. The damage had already been done. Conversations resumed in hushed tones around us, but no one was truly returning to their evening. Every glance, every whisper circled back to our table. Michael stood slowly, like a man carrying something invisible but unbearably heavy. We're leaving, he said, not looking at me. Clara stirred, barely conscious, her makeup smudged, her carefully constructed image unraveling in front of everyone she had spent years trying to impress. "This isn't what it looks like," she murmured weakly. I almost smiled again, because it was exactly what it looked like. Daniel hesitated, then followed his father without a word. For a brief second, I thought he might turn back, might ask me something, anything, but he didn't. And that, more than anything Clara had said earlier, stayed with me. I was the last to leave the table. I took my time gathering my things, aware of the eyes following me, aware of the story already forming in the minds of everyone present. By morning, it would spread far beyond that room. It always does. But what none of them knew, what none of them could possibly understand, was that this moment hadn't been born from anger. It had been built from patience. For months earlier, I had been standing in my kitchen arranging flowers that no one would ever notice. It was a quiet morning, the kind that stretches gently without urgency, and I remember thinking how peaceful everything felt. That peace ended the moment the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, I found a man who looked ordinary enough to be forgettable, mid-50s, slightly worn suit, eyes that had seen too much and learned to hide it. He introduced himself simply. "Ms. Abigail? My name is Victor Hale." There was no need for him to say more. I had hired him 3 weeks earlier. At the time, it had felt almost ridiculous, like indulging in paranoia. But something had been bothering me, something small and persistent. A neighbor had mentioned seeing Clara leaving a legal office downtown. Not once, but several times. It wasn't the visit itself that troubled me. It was the secrecy. Clara was the kind of woman who curated every detail of her life. If something didn't fit the image, she buried it. And I had begun to wonder what else she had buried. I invited him in, and we sat at my kitchen table. The same table where I had raised children, paid bills, made impossible decisions. I remember noticing how carefully he placed his briefcase down, how deliberate his movements were. "There's more here than you asked for," he said. That was the first warning. The second came when he opened the folder. "Once you see this," he added, "you won't be able to ignore it." I told him I wasn't interested in comfort, only truth. At the time, I believed I meant it. Then I saw the first document. Even now, I remember how the words blurred for a moment before coming into focus. Legal terminology, precise and cold, outlining something that should never be reduced to paperwork. A voluntary severance, not from a job, from a child. I didn't understand at first. Not fully. My mind rejected it, tried to reshape it into something more reasonable. "She has another child," Victor said quietly. Those 5 words changed everything. Her name was Lily. She was 22. And she had been erased. Not lost. Not taken. Not separated by circumstance. Erased. The documents showed it clearly. Clara had signed away her rights years earlier, not because she couldn't provide, not because she had no choice, but because she didn't want the complication. The language was polite, almost gentle, but the meaning was brutal. She wanted a new life. And Lily didn't fit into it. I remember gripping the edge of the table, trying to steady myself as more information followed. A social report. Notes from caseworkers. Timelines. Lily had been 15 when it happened. Old enough to understand exactly what was being done to her. Old enough to remember. "Where is she now?" I asked. Victor hesitated just for a second. "On her own," he said. "Working. Studying. No family support." He handed me a photograph. That was the moment it became real. She had Michael's eyes. The same warm brown. The same expression Daniel had when he was concentrating. But there was something else there too, something harder. A kind of quiet endurance you don't develop unless you've had to rely on yourself for far too long. "She doesn't know about your family," Victor added. "As far as she's aware, her mother disappeared. Disappeared. Not even abandoned. Rewritten." I felt something inside me shift that day. Not anger, not yet, but something colder. Something more precise. How far did this go? I asked. Victor met my gaze. There's a recording, he said. That was when he handed me the drive. I didn't watch it immediately. I carried it with me for hours, as if delaying it might somehow soften what it contained. But that night, alone in my living room, I finally played it, and I heard her say it, calmly, without hesitation. Tell her I'm dead. I didn't sleep that night, or the next, because once you understand what someone is capable of, you can't unknow it. You can't sit at the same table, smile at the same conversations, pretend you're looking at the same person. From that moment on, I wasn't just observing Clara anymore. I was studying her, watching how she spoke, what she avoided, who she kept close, and who she quietly pushed away. And the pattern revealed itself slowly but unmistakably. She didn't just remove people from her life. She erased them. Anyone who threatened the version of herself she wanted the world to see simply ceased to exist. And my family, my son, my grandson, they were part of that version, which meant eventually they could become expendable too. That was the thought that made my decision for me. Not revenge, not humiliation, protection. I spent weeks preparing, confirming, gathering everything I needed, not just to expose her, but to make sure she couldn't twist her way out of it. Because people like Clara don't break easily. They adapt. They redirect. They survive by rewriting reality faster than others can question it. So I waited for the right moment. For the moment when she would reveal herself publicly, when her own arrogance would open the door I needed. And that night, at the dinner, she did exactly that. She pushed, and I simply stopped holding the door closed. The first attack didn't come from Clara directly. That would have been too obvious, too easy to defend against. No, she was far more careful than that. She understood something most people never learn. If you want to win, you don't strike your opponent first. You take away their support system. You make them question themselves. You make others question them. And by the time the truth tries to stand up, there's no one left willing to listen. It started 2 days after the dinner. I was in my garden that morning, trimming roses that had already begun to wilt at the edges, when my phone rang. The name on the screen made me pause. My daughter, Emily. She rarely called early. Abigail, what's going on? Her voice was tight, controlled, but underneath it I could hear something else, uncertainty. I sat down slowly on the bench beside me. That depends. What have you heard? A small pause. Clara called me, she said. Of course she did. I closed my eyes for a second, not in frustration, but in recognition. The game had already begun. She said you've been trying to ruin her marriage for months, Emily continued carefully. She said you hired someone to follow her, that you staged something at Daniel's dinner. Staged. I almost admired the simplicity of it. Did she sound convincing? I asked. Abigail, she was crying, Emily said softly. I've never heard her like that. There it was. Emotion. The most effective weapon of all. I see, I replied. Another pause. Longer this time. Is it true? Emily asked. Did you really investigate her? Yes, I said. I didn't hesitate. I didn't soften it. And I could feel the shift on the other end of the line immediately. Why would you do that? She asked, quieter now. That's not like you. I looked out at the garden, at the flowers I had been tending for years, thinking how easily something healthy could be overtaken if you ignored the wrong signs for too long. She has another daughter, I said. Silence. Not disbelief yet. Just silence. What? Emily finally whispered. Her name is Lily. She's been on her own for years. Clara gave her up, legally, completely. I expected shock, outrage, something. Instead, What I heard next was far more dangerous. That doesn't make sense, Emily said slowly. And there it was.
Doubt. Small.
Quiet, but already alive. I have documents, I said. Recordings. This isn't speculation. I'm not saying you're wrong, she replied quickly. I'm just saying there could be more to it. Clara said the situation was complicated, that Lily had problems, that she made a difficult decision at the time. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was predictable. Clara wasn't denying the truth. She was reshaping it. And more importantly, she was doing it first. Emily, I said carefully, a 15-year-old girl doesn't become disposable because a situation is complicated. I know, she said, but her voice lacked conviction now. I don't understand why you didn't come to Michael privately. There it was again. The shift in focus. Not what Clara did. What I did. She told you I ambushed her, I said. Emily didn't answer. She didn't need to. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, the phone still in my hand, listening to the quiet around me. That was when I realized something important. Clara wasn't trying to defend herself. She was reframing the story, and she was doing it faster than I had anticipated. By the afternoon, the second call came. Then the third. A cousin. An old family friend. Even Daniel's girlfriend. Each conversation slightly different, but built on the same structure. Clara, emotional and wounded. Me, cold and intrusive. The investigation, not as a search for truth, but as a violation. By evening, I no longer needed confirmation. She was moving through my life systematically, undoing me. The next day, my neighbor Margaret came by for tea. We had known each other for nearly 20 years. She was not someone who rushed to judgment, which made what she said next all the more telling. I don't want to take sides, she began carefully, stirring her tea even though she hadn't added anything to it. But people are talking. They always do, I replied. She hesitated. They're saying you've never accepted Clara, that you've been looking for a reason to expose her. I leaned back slightly in my chair, studying her face. And what do you think? I asked. Margaret sighed. I think it's possible things were misunderstood. Clara said the girl, Lily, had issues. That she chose to distance herself. That it wasn't abandonment. There it was again. The same script. The same careful distortion. Did she mention the legal termination? I asked. Margaret frowned. She said it was more of a formal arrangement. For stability. Stability. I repeated the word silently. It was almost impressive how neatly Clara had repackaged cruelty into something that sounded responsible. She also said, Margaret continued more hesitantly, that you took parts of a conversation out of context. That the video doesn't show the full story. Of course it doesn't. No truth ever survives long when someone is determined to rewrite it. And you believe that? I asked. Margaret looked uncomfortable. I think the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. No. It wasn't. But that's the thing about manipulation. It doesn't need people to fully believe a lie. It only needs them to stop trusting the truth. That evening, Michael called. His voice was calm. Too calm. Abigail, we need to talk. Not, Mom. Not even can we talk. We need to talk. I'm listening, I said. Not over the phone, he replied. Tomorrow. Somewhere neutral. Neutral. As if I were a threat. As if I needed to be contained. We agreed on a small cafe halfway between our homes. I arrived early, choosing a table in the corner where we could speak without an audience. I had spent the night thinking, not about what I would say, but about what he would say. And, more importantly, what he had already decided to believe. When he walked in, I saw it immediately. The posture. The distance. This wasn't a son coming to understand. This was a man coming to manage a situation. He sat down without ordering anything. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he exhaled slowly. "I've been thinking about everything that happened," he began. "I imagine you have," I said. "What you did," he continued, choosing his words carefully. "The investigation, the way you revealed it, it wasn't right." There it was. Not denial, judgment. I felt something cold settle in my chest. "And what would have been right?" I asked. "You should have come to me," he said immediately. "Privately. We could have handled it as a family." "As a family," I repeated. "Yes." I held his gaze. "This isn't about how I handled it," I said quietly. "This is about what she did." Michael's jaw tightened. "According to Clara," he said, "the situation with Lily wasn't what you think. She said you misunderstood things, that the girl chose to cut contact." "And you believe that?" I asked. He didn't hesitate. "I believe my wife."
Simple. Clean.
Final. I nodded slowly. "Then tell me this," I said. "Do you believe she told that girl she was dead?" He flinched, just slightly. "She said that conversation was taken out of context," he replied. "That you only showed part of it." "Of course she did." "That's convenient," I said. "Abigail," his voice hardened now, "you hired someone to dig into her past. You invaded her privacy. That makes me question your intentions." There it was. The final shift. Not just doubt. Suspicion.
Of me.
I studied him carefully. The man I had raised, the boy who once trusted my judgment without question. And now, standing in front of me, repeating someone else's narrative as if it were his own. "Your intentions?" he pressed. I almost smiled. "My intentions," I said slowly, "were to protect this family." "From what?" he asked. And that was the moment I understood. He wasn't asking. He had already chosen his answer. "From the truth," I said. He shook his head. "No," he replied. "From you." For 2 weeks after that conversation, the silence around me grew heavier than any argument could have been. Calls stopped. Invitations disappeared. Even the casual messages, the small, meaningless check-ins that stitch relationships together, faded into nothing. It was as if I had been quietly moved to the edge of my own life, still visible, but no longer included. I went through my routines the way I always had: morning tea, tending the garden, evening walks, but everything felt slightly displaced, like furniture in a room that had been rearranged overnight. And yet, beneath that silence, I could feel movement. Clara wasn't finished. She had secured her position inside the family, for now, but people like her don't settle after one victory. They reinforce it. They make sure no loose threads remain. And I was a very loose thread. The knock at my door came just after sunset on a Thursday. Not the hesitant knock of a delivery or the impatient rhythm of someone in a hurry. It was measured, intentional. I knew, before I opened it, that whoever stood outside wasn't there by accident. And when I opened the door, the world shifted. She stood there with a small bag slung over her shoulder, hair pulled back, posture steady but not rigid. She wasn't dressed to impress, not trying to make an entrance. But there was something about her presence that filled the space anyway. For a moment, neither of us spoke, because we both knew. "Abigail," she said. Her voice was softer than I expected. "Yes." A pause. "My name is Lily." I had seen her photograph, studied it, memorized it, even. But seeing her in front of me was something else entirely. Photographs flatten people. They remove the weight of their presence, the subtle movements, the way they hold themselves. In person, she felt real, and that made everything worse. I gripped the doorframe slightly, steadying myself.
Come in.
She stepped inside carefully, her eyes moving around the room, not with curiosity, but with awareness. like someone used to entering spaces where they weren't sure how welcome they were. I hope this isn't inappropriate, she said, showing up like this.
No, irraplia.
It's overdue. That made her pause. We moved into the kitchen, and I offered her coffee more out of instinct than necessity. She accepted, sitting at the table while I busied myself with something simple, something grounding. I didn't know how else to approach this, she said after a moment. But when someone starts asking questions about your life, you notice.
Of course she did. Victor, I said.
She nodded. He was careful, she added, but not invisible. I turned, leaning slightly against the counter. How much do you know? Enough, she said. Then, after a small pause, but not everything. That's why I'm here. There was no accusation in her voice. That surprised me. I found out about you, she continued. About your family. About her. She didn't say Clara's name.
She didn't need to.
And?
I asked.
Lily exhaled slowly. I thought she was dead. The words landed quietly, but they didn't need force. They carried their own weight. I set the cup down in front of her more carefully than necessary. What do you mean? I asked, even though something inside me already knew. She wrapped her hands around the cup, not drinking, just holding it. When I turned 20, I tried to find her, she said. I saved money, hired someone. I needed answers. Her gaze dropped briefly to the table. He came back with documents. A death certificate. He said she died in an accident. My chest tightened. Not shock. Recognition. Because now the missing piece had finally fallen into place. I believed him, Lily continued. I grieved. For someone who had already left me once. Her voice didn't break. That was the worst part. I spent years trying to make sense of it, she said. Trying to forgive her, even. Because it's easier to forgive someone who's gone than someone who chose to leave. I sat down across from her slowly. She paid someone, Lily added, her voice quieter now, to make sure that story would hold. There it was. Not just abandonment. Erasure with precision. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Because what do you say to that? I'm sorry, I said finally. It felt insufficient. It was insufficient, but it was the truth. She nodded slightly. I know. Another silence. Different this time. Less heavy. More focused. I need to understand something, she said, lifting her gaze to meet mine directly. Why were you looking for me? Not angry. Not defensive. Just clear. So I told her. Everything. From the first suspicion, to the investigation, to the recording, to the dinner. I didn't soften it. I didn't adjust it to make myself look better. I gave her the truth the way I had lived it. She listened without interrupting, without reacting, which somehow made it harder. When I finished, she leaned back slightly, processing it all. She has a son, she said after a moment. Yes. And he knows now. He was there. Another pause. What did he say? I considered the question carefully. He didn't say much, I answered. Not yet. Lily nodded slowly, absorbing that. I want to meet him. The words came calmly, decisively. I felt my stomach tighten. That may not go the way you expect, I said. It already didn't go the way I expected, she replied.
Fair.
He believes her, I added.
For now, Lily said.
There was something in her tone, not arrogance, not anger.
Certainty.
The kind that doesn't come from confidence, but from experience. I don't want anything from them, she continued. Not money. Not apologies. Then what do you want? I asked. She hesitated. Just slightly. I want him to know I exist, she said. And I want him to understand who she is. Simple.
Clear.
Dangerous. Because truth, when spoken plainly, has a way of cutting through even the most carefully constructed lies. There's something you should know, I said. She looked at me. She's already prepared them. I continued. She's told them a version of your story. I assumed she would. She's painted you as difficult, troubled, someone who pushed her away. Lily let out a quiet breath.
Of course she had.
That's efficient, she said. You're not surprised? No, she replied. That's how people like her survive. People like her, not my mother. That distinction mattered. I studied her carefully. This wasn't a girl looking for closure. This was someone who had already survived without it. There's a family gathering this weekend, I said slowly. At her house. Lily's eyes didn't widen. She didn't hesitate. Take me, she said. I considered it. Not because I doubted her, but because I knew exactly what it would unleash. They won't be ready, I said. Neither was I, she replied. That ended the discussion. Because there are moments when hesitation is just another form of avoidance. And I had already made that mistake once, waiting, watching, preparing. This time, the truth would walk in on its own. All right, I said. And, for the first time since she arrived, Lily smiled. Not a wide smile, not an easy one, but real. And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to fully understand before. Clara hadn't just tried to erase her past. She had tried to erase someone who was stronger than she ever anticipated. And this time, there would be no quiet disappearance, only confrontation. The morning of the gathering arrived heavy and gray, the kind of day where the sky feels low enough to press against your shoulders. I woke earlier than usual, not because I had slept well, but because my mind refused to settle. There are moments in life when you understand, with absolute clarity, that something irreversible is about to happen. This was one of them. Lily arrived just before noon. She looked different from the night she first stood at my door, not softer, not more confident, but more resolved. There's a quiet transformation that happens when someone decides they're done running from the truth, and I could see it in the way she carried herself. She wore a simple dress, nothing extravagant, but chosen with intention. Not to impress, not to provoke, just to stand her ground. Are you ready? I asked as she stepped inside. No, she said honestly. Then, after a brief pause, but I don't think that matters. It didn't. The drive to Michael's house was mostly silent. Not uncomfortable, just focused. We both knew that once we stepped out of that car, there would be no controlling what came next.
No careful passing. No gradual reveal.
Just impact. As we pulled up, I noticed the small details immediately. Cars lined neatly along the curb. The front door slightly ajar. Laughter drifting faintly from inside. It looked exactly like what it was meant to be, a family trying to repair itself. Or, at least, pretending to. We don't have to do this, I said quietly, my hand still resting on the steering wheel. Lily shook her head. We do. I nodded once. We stepped out of the car together. For a brief moment, as we approached the house, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not fear, not doubt, anticipation. I knocked, not because I needed to, but because it felt appropriate. A boundary, however small. The door opened almost immediately. Michael stood there, and for a split second, he looked relieved. Abigail, he said, then his expression shifted as his eyes moved past me. Confusion, recognition, and then understanding. I stepped slightly to the side. This is Lily, I said. Your stepdaughter. Time doesn't actually stop, but it can feel like it does. Michael didn't move,
Didn't speak.
He just stared at her, his mind trying to rearrange reality fast enough to keep up with what he was seeing. And the resemblance, subtle but undeniable, made it impossible to dismiss. Hello, Lily said calmly. From somewhere deeper in the house, I heard Clara's voice. Who is it? And then, the sound of something shattering.
Glass.
Silence followed. Heavy. Immediate. David. No, not David anymore. Michael corrected himself automatically, his mind catching on the smallest details while everything else fell apart. Clara, he called out. But she already knew. We stepped inside. And the carefully constructed illusion of that afternoon began to collapse. The room was full. Family, familiar faces, people who had spent the past weeks quietly choosing sides. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Eyes turned, every single one of them drawn to Lily, as if pulled by something instinctive. Clara stood near the kitchen doorway, a towel still in her hand, frozen in place. I had seen her angry, controlled, calculated, but I had never seen her afraid. Until now. Lily, she whispered. Not loudly, but clearly enough. Lily didn't move closer.
She didn't need to.
Yes, she said simply. Daniel stood up slowly from the couch, his gaze moving between them. Wait, what?
She's your sister, I said.
Half-sister, Lily corrected gently. Daniel stared at her like he was trying to memorize her face and reject it at the same time. That's not possible, Clara said quickly, stepping forward now, her voice sharpening as control began to slip. This is some kind of misunderstanding. No, Lily replied, her voice steady. It isn't. Michael turned toward Clara slowly. You said she. I explained this. Clara cut in, too quickly. She was angry. She left. She chose to cut contact. Lily let out a small breath. No, she said again. You signed papers when I was 15. The room tightened. Clara shook her head, already adjusting. That was a complicated situation. You weren't. I was getting straight A's, Lily interrupted. I was working part-time. I was taking care of my grandmother. The precision of her words cut through Clara's narrative before it could fully form. That's not the whole story, Clara snapped. Then tell it, Lily said. Simple.
Direct.
Unavoidable. Clara hesitated. And, in that hesitation, something important shifted. Because for the first time, she didn't have control of the story. Michael stepped forward slightly. Clara, is any of this true? That question mattered more than anything else. Because it wasn't accusation. It was doubt. And doubt is where everything begins to fall apart. Clara looked at him, searching for the right version of truth to give him. I was trying to protect everyone, she said finally. I wasn't ready. I had no support. I made the best decision I could at the time. Lily tilted her head slightly. Did you also make the best decision when you paid someone to tell me you were dead? The words didn't explode. They landed, and stayed there. Clara's face went pale. Michael blinked. What? Lily reached into her bag and pulled out a folder, placing it calmly on the table between them. Everything is in there, she said. Documents. Payments. Statements. No drama. No raised voice. Just evidence. Michael opened it slowly, like someone afraid of what they might find but unable to stop themselves. Daniel stepped closer. Others leaned in. And the room, once filled with conversation, became something else entirely. A courtroom without a judge. Clara took a step back. This is ridiculous, she said, but her voice had lost its strength. You don't understand what I went through. No, Lily said. You don't understand what you did. That was the moment everything changed. Because Clara's arguments, her carefully built defenses, relied on distance, on ambiguity, on control. And Lily had removed all three. Michael looked up from the folder. I watched his face carefully. Not anger. Not yet. Something deeper. Recognition. You told her you were dead? He asked quietly. Clara didn't answer immediately. And that was answer enough. I was trying to give her closure, she said finally. Closure. The word hung in the air like something fragile, then broke. That's not closure, Daniel said quietly. All eyes turned to him. That's erasing someone, he added. Clara looked at him, shocked, because she hadn't prepared for that. Not from him. I did what I had to do, she said sharply, desperation creeping in now. I had a future to build. I couldn't let my past destroy it. Lily met her gaze. You didn't choose a future, she said. You chose yourself. And there it was. The truth. Not dressed up. Not softened. Just spoken. Michael closed the folder.
Carefully.
Deliberately. And when he looked at Clara again, everything had changed. Get out, he said. Quiet. Final. For a moment after Michael told Clara to leave, no one moved. It wasn't shock, not exactly. It was the kind of stillness that comes when something long denied finally becomes undeniable. Clara stood there, her eyes moving across the room, searching for support, for doubt, for anything she could still use.
But the room had changed.
The same people who, just days ago, had repeated her version of events now stood quietly, avoiding her gaze. That was the thing about truth. It doesn't need to shout. Once it's seen clearly, it reshapes everything around it. You can't be serious, Clara said finally, her voice low but sharp. You're going to throw me out because of this? She gestured vaguely toward Lily, toward the folder, toward the entire situation as if it were something small and inconvenient rather than something irreversible. Michael didn't raise his voice. He didn't step closer. He simply stood there, looking at her like he was seeing her for the first time without the filter she had carefully maintained for years. I'm asking you to leave because I don't know who you are, he said. And I don't think you've ever intended for me to know. That landed harder than anything else had, because anger can be argued with. But clarity? Clarity ends things. Clara let out a short, incredulous laugh, the kind that's meant to reassert control. You're overreacting. This is exactly what she wanted. Her eyes flicked toward me, sharp again, searching for something to latch onto. She's been trying to destroy us from the beginning.
You know that.
I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Because this moment wasn't about me anymore. It hadn't been for a while. Stop, Daniel said. It wasn't loud, but it cut through everything. Clara turned toward him, surprised. You don't get to do that, he continued, his voice steadier than I had ever heard it. You don't get to blame someone else for something you chose. That was the second fracture. And this one mattered even more, because Clara had built her entire position on the assumption that Daniel, her son, would remain aligned with her, that he would hesitate, question, soften the impact. Instead, he stepped away, not physically, but unmistakably. Daniel, she began, her tone shifting, softening, reaching for familiarity. He shook his head. Just stop. The room felt smaller now, the tension no longer scattered but focused entirely on her. Clara's composure cracked then, not completely, but enough to reveal what had always been underneath. Not fear alone, but frustration. The kind that comes when control slips and there's nothing left to grab onto. You all think you're so righteous, she said, her voice rising. Like you would have done better. Like you understand what it takes to start over, to build something real. No, Lily said quietly. We understand what it takes not to destroy someone to do it. Clara turned on her immediately. You have no idea what I sacrificed.
Ida, Lily interrupted.
You sacrificed me. The simplicity of it left no room for interpretation. And for the first time, Clara had nothing immediate to say. That silence stretched, uncomfortable and exposed, until Michael stepped forward again. You need to go, he repeated. This time, there was no argument left in his voice. Just decision. Clara looked at him, really looked at him, as if trying to find the version of him she had always been able to influence. But it wasn't there anymore. In its place was something steadier, and far less flexible. "You'll regret this," she said finally, her voice dropping, losing its edge, and becoming something colder. "All of you. You think this makes things better? You think this fixes anything?" No one answered. Because some questions don't deserve answers. They just need to pass. Clara exhaled sharply, then turned and walked toward the door. Not rushed. Not defeated in appearance. Even now, she maintained some level of composure. But the illusion was gone, and everyone could see it. The door closed behind her with a sharp, final sound that seemed to echo longer than it should have. And just like that, she was gone. The room didn't relax immediately. No one suddenly smiled or moved on. Instead, there was a different kind of stillness now, one not built on tension, but on adjustment. People shifted slightly, glances exchanged, quiet recalibrations happening in real time. Michael sat down slowly, as if his body had finally acknowledged the weight it had been holding. He rested his hands on his knees, staring at the floor for a moment before looking up at Lily. "I should have known," he said. It wasn't directed at anyone in particular, just a thought spoken aloud. Lily didn't respond right away. She stood where she had been, not stepping forward, not claiming space that wasn't yet hers. That restraint, intentional or instinctive, spoke more than anything she could have said. "You couldn't have," she replied eventually. "People don't expect this from someone they trust." Michael nodded slowly. Daniel moved closer then, standing beside Lily, still studying her, still processing. "I don't know what to say," he admitted. "That makes two of us," she said lightly. There was something in that exchange, small, almost unnoticeable, but real. A beginning. The rest of the afternoon unfolded in a way none of us could have planned. Conversations started slowly, cautiously, like people testing the ground after an earthquake. Questions were asked, not invasive, not aggressive, but necessary. Lily answered them simply, without embellishment, without trying to win anyone over. She didn't need to. The truth did that on its own. What struck me most wasn't what was said, but what wasn't. No one defended Clara anymore. No one tried to reinterpret what had happened. The narrative she had built so carefully over weeks had collapsed in less than an hour, not because it was weak, but because it couldn't survive direct confrontation with reality. At one point, I stepped back slightly, watching from a distance as Daniel and Lily spoke quietly near the window. He was asking questions, careful ones, respectful ones, and she was answering in the same measured way. There was no forced connection, no immediate closeness, but there was recognition. And that was enough. Michael eventually stood and walked over to them. He hesitated briefly, then addressed Lily directly. "I don't expect you to forgive anything," he said. "And I don't know what comes next. But you're not alone anymore." It wasn't a grand statement, but it was honest. And that mattered more. Lily nodded. "That's more than I had yesterday." Simple. Direct. True. As the evening began to wind down, people left in smaller groups, quieter than they had arrived. The energy of the house had changed completely. Not lighter, not yet, but clearer. Like a fog had lifted, revealing something that had always been there, but hadn't been acknowledged. When it was just the three of us left, Michael, Daniel, and me, the silence returned, but this time it felt different. "What happens now?" Daniel asked. Michael exhaled slowly. "Now we deal with reality." I almost smiled at that, because for the first time in a long time, that was exactly what we were doing. 6 months is a strange amount of time, long enough for the surface of things to change, but not long enough for everything underneath to fully settle. If you had walked into my home back then on that quiet Sunday afternoon, you might have thought nothing unusual had ever happened. The table was set, the smell of food filled the house, voices carried from the other room, familiar, warm, almost ordinary. But there was nothing ordinary about how we had arrived there. I stood in the kitchen, checking the oven for what felt like the 10th time, more out of habit than necessity. I had always cooked for my family, but this felt different now. Not like obligation, not like routine. It felt intentional. From the dining room, I could hear Daniel's voice, animated in a way that reminded me of when he was younger, before expectations had sharpened him into something more measured. And then I heard Lily laugh, soft at first, then more freely, and I paused for a moment, letting that sound settle into the space around me. That sound didn't exist here 6 months ago. Neither did she. Do you need help, or are you just reorganizing things for the sake of it? Michael's voice came from behind me. I turned slightly, raising an eyebrow. If I needed help, I wouldn't ask you. He almost smiled. That was another thing that had changed. Not dramatically, not in ways you would notice immediately, but in small, quiet shifts. The distance that had grown between us hadn't disappeared overnight. It couldn't, but it had been acknowledged. And once something is acknowledged, it can be rebuilt. Slowly, carefully. Everything looks fine, he said, glancing over the counter. Then, after a pause, you've done a lot. I always have, I replied. He nodded. And for once, there was no tension in the silence that followed. Is she settling in? I asked. He knew exactly who I meant. Yes, he said. Better than I expected. That wasn't just a casual observation. It carried weight, because none of us had truly known what to expect. Lily had moved closer a few weeks after that afternoon, transferred her classes, found a small place nearby, though she spent more time here than there. Not out of dependency. That was the important part. She wasn't filling a void. She was choosing to stay. That distinction mattered more than anything. She's stubborn, Michael added. I allowed myself a small smile. That's not a flaw. No, he said quietly. It isn't. From the other room, Daniel called out, Are we eating today or next week? Patience, I called back. It's a skill. Not one I inherited, he replied. That much is clear. Lily laughed again. And just like that, the space felt lighter. We sat down not long after. No ceremony, no announcement, just the natural shift from preparation to presence. Plates passed, glasses filled, small conversations overlapping in a way that felt unforced. At some point, I found myself watching them instead of participating. Daniel leaning forward as he spoke, animated, engaged. Lily listening, then responding with that same measured clarity she had shown from the very beginning. Michael observing both of them, quieter than usual, but not distant. Present. That was the word. He was present. I still can't believe how similar you are, Daniel said at one point, shaking his head slightly as he looked at Lily. She tilted her head. We're not that similar. You both do that, he insisted. Do what? That thing, he gestured vaguely, where you pause before answering like you're deciding how much truth someone can handle. She considered that, then smiled. Maybe. There it was again. Not forced connection, not immediate closeness, but recognition. The kind that builds something real. I'm still getting used to this, Daniel admitted after a moment. Having a sister. Half-sister, she corrected automatically. He shook his head. No, that part doesn't matter. She didn't argue, but she didn't fully accept it either. Not yet. And that was fine. Because some things don't need to be defined immediately. They just need time. Michael spoke less during dinner, but when he did, it carried more weight than before. Not because he was trying to assert anything, but because he was choosing his words more carefully. That, I realized, was something Clara had never allowed him to do. She had filled space, controlled direction. Now he was learning how to exist without that. It's not as easy as people think. What about your classes? He asked Lily at one point.
Good, she said. Busy.
But manageable. And work? I cut back a little, she admitted. Not completely. He nodded, as if that answer satisfied something he hadn't fully articulated. You don't have to do everything alone anymore, he said. It wasn't a command, or even advice, just a statement. Lily met his gaze. I know, she said. And she meant it. But knowing something and relying on it are two different things. That would take time. After dinner, we moved into the living room. No one rushed to leave. No one checked the time. That, more than anything, told me how much had changed. Because before, gatherings had always carried an undercurrent, expectations, impressions, roles being maintained.
Now,
there was none of that. Just people. At one point, Lily stepped into the kitchen to help me clear plates. I didn't ask her to. She simply followed. You don't have to do that, I said. I know, she replied, but she stayed anyway. We worked in quiet for a moment before she spoke again. This still feels unreal sometimes, she admitted.
Ich glänzte her.
That doesn't go away immediately. She nodded. I spent so long thinking I didn't have anyone, she said, that it's hard to adjust. You don't have to rush that, I replied. She leaned slightly against the counter, thinking. I'm not trying to replace anything, she said, or pretend it didn't happen. I wouldn't expect you to. She looked at me then more directly. But I am trying to build something new. I held her gaze. That's the only thing worth doing, I said. She smiled slightly. Not wide, not effortless, but real. When we returned to the living room, Daniel was mid-story, gesturing dramatically as Michael listened with what looked suspiciously like amusement. Lily sat down beside them, and just like that, she fit. Not perfectly, not seamlessly, but genuinely. And that mattered more. Later that evening, after they had both left, the house grew quiet again. I stood by the window for a while, looking out at the street, thinking about everything that had happened. The dinner, the confrontation, the unraveling of something that had once seemed so stable. It would be easy to call it destruction, to focus on what was lost, but that wouldn't be accurate. Because what Clara had built wasn't stability, it was control. And control, no matter how polished, never lasts. What we had now wasn't perfect. There were still questions, still distance in certain places, still things that would take time to fully heal. But it was real. And real things, even when they're difficult,
can grow.
I turned off the lights one by one, moving through the house slowly, not out of habit this time, but out of awareness. Because for the first time in a long time, nothing felt hidden, and that, more than anything else, felt like peace.